first floor there was a door that was always locked, but now we can enter it, and at the bottom is a single wheelchair. Celine talks about someone in this wheelchair and how they regret what happened to them, but unfortunately that's all the info we seem to get. That's because this cutscene is just one part of the story, as the reward for finishing this sequence is a set of car keys, and I only know of one car here on Atropos. That means we have to defeat Ophion again, as the car is locked behind the boss room. Having the keys allows you to interact with the car, rewarding you with the second half of the cutscene, which shows a grotesque creature sitting in the wheelchair instead. He seems to briefly attack her before Celine fights back, wounding it in the process. Before it dies and falls out to her, and the subtitles show the name Thea at the bottom. The final scene is then shown from the perspective of the astronaut. The channel takes a quick look on Metroid Prime, as we briefly see the face of the being inside, only to discover that it's Celine. The car and the astronaut during the crash? It's a little bit confusing, but thankfully we have one last piece of content to discuss. We can imagine players being a bit annoyed at the end though, seeing as it answers none of the questions posed by the game, but rather adds more complications. Still, like the last ending, there are a few more pieces that we can add to our puzzle. This creature is without question Celine's mom, but her design is rather peculiar. If we go with the theory that Atropos is manifesting creations based on the mind of the visitor, then this to me is how Celine views her mom, this disgusting looking creature. It's not the only time the game will do this, which is why I believe in theory, but even the in-game items paint a pretty convincing picture. When visiting the house again, Celine might see a news report of a crash. This crash is not referring to hers, but rather the one with her mom. Celine and Thea got into a crash on the same bridge as the one Celine and Helios went on, but in this case, Celine came out unharmed and Thea was injured, forcing her to use a wheelchair for life. This tracks with the creature using the wheelchair, but her stomach is noticeably large, implying that Thea was pregnant. In the myth, Helios and Celine were siblings, with Thea being her mother, so it's safe to assume that the child would have been Helios. Celine's child, Helios, is different. There's another audio log that has Celine talking to her doctor. Two eventually got on the topic of names, but Celine claimed that she already had one picked out, saying that it was from her family, implying that she named her son Helios after her late brother that never made it. This hostility we see for the creature is also representative of Celine's relationship with her mom. Thea had the dream of becoming an astronaut, but thanks to the crash she was unable to live out that dream as her spine and legs were severely broken. She grew rather angry over this and wouldn't have a chance to let this boil over since Celine got her passion for astronomy and space from her mom. Plus, according to the police report, the injuries Thea received were exacerbated due to her trying to save her passengers, so had she not saved Celine, she would have been fine. So now Thea has to watch her dreams slip away from her, all while her daughter gets to live the life that she wanted. That is why she hated her. Celine was abused as a child verbally and possibly physically due to this. It was always a bad day when Thea was around, and she was definitely going to make sure Celine got an earful of it, always reminding her that she was the cause of her mother's pain. Whenever her mother would call her, it was never to ask about her or how she's doing, it was always to complain. But this event caused a massive rift between the two, one that would get worse as we continue to discover more about her. The only part about this that isn't exactly clear is Helios, Celine's brother, not her kid. Going back to the police report, the text specifically uses the words passengers and them, implying that Thea was rescuing multiple people and not just Celine. Within the DLC again is also a newspaper, with the crash being the headline. However, there's a paragraph at the bottom that says that the police have not found a trace of her missing child in either the lake or the surrounding forest, but that a second child was recovered and unharmed from the water. Weirdly, that last line is cut off in the in-game reader, which to my knowledge is the only document that does this. It's almost as if the devs had intentionally hid this detail here on purpose. The mention of a forest, though, got me thinking about something else here in the hospital, and that these childlike drawings are the reception desk. Each photo tells a tale about a girl and her family, her mom and someone who goes unnamed. One day they seem to have gotten split up and the girl was left wandering the forest. While walking around, she heard a voice call out to her but couldn't find the source. Eventually she didn't make it home, but by the time she did, she ended up becoming a full-grown woman. The final line says, "It's time to take flight to where the sun shines bright." My initial reaction was that the sun was a metaphor for heaven, and that this was Helios, whose soul was trying to find something to Thea. But the picture seemed very adamant that this character is a girl, which adds to the confusion. Plus, there's also the question of who the blurred-out name is. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this myself, but at the very least, the newspaper does at least confirm that two kids were in the car at the time of the crash. Celine, and who I assume was her brother Helios. Everything regarding Thea's pregnancy is completely up in the air. We do have a few more pieces of info to find, but before we move on to that, I know this video has been rather disjointed, almost mimicking the chaotic nature of the game's story. But I do hope that through all this you can see how wonderful the story of Eternal has started to become. You will feel extremely confused by the end, but the game does make sure things are at least semi-cohesive when it comes to the important stuff. History is an easy way for me to get interested in the story. I wanted to know what happened to Celine and why she was being subjected to this. The game continuously strung me along with this pitch, and the longer I held on, the more enveloped I became. Like I said before, from very early on, I knew I wanted to see this through to the end because something about this was truly special. It was like something I hadn't experienced before, so like Celine, I wanted to get the answers to the questions I had. But just as the loop continues, so too does the story. A year after release, Returnal would get a free post-launch update called Ascension, which not only added a co-op mode, letting you break through the dangers of Atropos with a friend, but also added a new endless game mode called the Tower of Sisyphus. In the myth, Sisyphus refers to the man of the same name, who is most well known for being the guy who rolls a boulder up a mountain. That's because he was a prominent trickster and cheated death more than 2 times, so the gods cursed him to roll the boulder up, only to let it go back down once he reached the top. Instead of rolling a boulder up a hill though, we're going to be rolling Celine up a tower. As the name implies, this is a gauntlet of death that can't be finished. The whole point is to go through as many floors as possible until you die, and then do it again to get a better score. It is without question a perfect DLC for a game like this. Outside of the occasional cipher and scout log, the tower is a strictly gameplay-focused experience, so for those that want the gameplay, then you can kill to your heart's content. Plus, you no longer need to reset once the final boss of the act is complete, as there is no ending. You can go as long as you want. It's genuinely an amazing piece of content, and the only thing this game really needed, honestly. But the tower is not without its own story. The DLC adds more scout logs, lists, and archives, some of which are related to the tower, while others help add more context to previous conversations we've had throughout the video. It also acts as a continuation of Celine's story, as while reveling in the death and carnage, he will, once again, eventually slip up and die. This causes a hospital bed to spawn in the main room. These hospital visits replace our house sequences from earlier, and are to me the most important piece of content in the game. Seeing the hospital reminds Celine of her mother, and decides to get her a bouquet of white poppies. Celine likely did this before in real life after the crash had happened, so she's trying to do it again in hopes of getting an answer. This requires us to get 6 poppies, just like the 6 sun fragments, and they are acquired the exact same way, yet it's somehow more annoying than before. The 6 fragments were random, whereas the 6 poppies are guaranteed to always show up on the same floor, except you can only carry one at a time, as each one comes with its own hospital visit. So continuing on to the next floor after finding one is pointless. Each time you acquire these, you have to get the flower, die or reset, do the hospital visit, go back to the tower, then go a little bit further than last time, only to repeat that 5 more times. It is agonizingly slow, and maybe one of the most tedious things I've ever done. I have no idea how they managed to make the gathering process worse than the sun fragments, but they did. What broke up a lot of the tedium though was the scout logs that appear here, and while all of them were informative, some of which I want to highlight were about Celine's mental state. Going off what's heard, it's almost as if the tower has broken her in some way, or at least another version of her, since Celine's not the one making these logs. She's left feeling helpless after every failure, so she has to go all the way back down just to climb up again. One of the scout logs mentions how she's doing this to give herself meaning and purpose. She's exhausted all the options but the tower, so if this fails, that's it. She needs to believe that there is something at the top, so she has to convince herself to not give up, as if this fails and there truly is no way out, then what's the point? A bit unrelated to this, but there are a few more logs that present her as almost manic, mentioning how her suit claims that she's contaminated by all the blood and parasites attached to her, but she doesn't seem to mind, as she actually feels beautiful in her new skin. It's almost meta in that sense, as while our Celine didn't say these words, the player could be feeling this emotion. All of the Celines in-game are really just all our different versions playing at once. Your Celine and mine are out there doing their own things separately, so naturally each one will reflect the mind of the player wielding her. Are you confident enough that you can make it to the top, or have you given up, wallowing in the blood of your enemies and trying to make sense of what's going on, questioning whether this is even worth your time? Similarly, those that have succumbed to the cycle and uninstalled the game is another way of saying that Celine gave up. It's a rather fascinating way to portray a character, especially if you look at this from Celine's perspective. All of these Celines may be different, but they are her, so if the tower broke them, who's to say it won't break her too? It becomes even more concerning once you start to familiarize yourself with Celine. Being part researcher and part explorer, much of her dialogue is analytical, explaining things based on how they are, rather than delving into nonsensical opinionated talks. When Celine first grabs the assault rifle, she doesn't cheer in joy over finding a better weapon. She rather notes how the weapon is similar to the carbine technology that they have back on Earth. Or instead of freaking out over the parasite grabbing her arm, she studies it, lets it attach to her, and then reports how she feels. To use a weird analogy, it's like hearing your quiet friend get angry for the first time. You're almost taken aback by it. Equally, whenever Celine talks about herself and has an actual opinion, it's time to shut up and listen, as who knows how long it's going to be before he says something else again. Which is made all the worse when the opinions you do hear of her are about her abusive mother or how she went out to defend things that dated Atropos. Assuming you do push past the rooms and gather a poppy or two, you'll gain access to the hospital. The hospital visits are largely the same, with small parts of the area being changed each visit. Sometimes a new note will appear or another iteration of something will develop. After enough flowers have been found, Celine can then open the door. Inside is her mother, Thea, but instead of berating her like before, the two hug for probably the first time since the crash. It's all a ruse though, as the body will disappear with chaos taking her place. When she wakes up, she recalls that this is how things actually work. Atonement or embrace, just guilt and anger. Like the base game, there is one last ending to it. Chaos taking her place. When she Inside is her mother, Thea, but instead of berating her like before, she hugged for probably the first time since the crash. It's all a ruse though, as the body will disappear with chaos taking her place. When she wakes up, she recalls that this is how things actually work. No atonement or embrace, just guilt and anger. Like the base game, there is one last ending to acquire, but the hospital and tower give us a ton of new information that either adds or recontextualizes most of what we know already. So now that everything has been given to us, we can finally talk about what's really going on here. As mentioned before, Celine and Thea got into an accident one day, which permanently left Thea bound to a wheelchair. As we know though, Celine would also get into a car accident on the same bridge, except she managed to survive, with Helios taking the fall. Returnal is quite a weird story with many coincidences, but it becomes a lot easier to understand when you look at it metaphorically. Both women, Celine and Thea, were mothers, who had dreams of being astronauts and crashed on the same bridge. It's meant to show how similar the two are, and how Celine has become like her mother. It's also meant to show the effects of generational trauma. Thea's disappointment in Celine affected her mentally, which in turn was passed on to Helios through her, because the other connection they share is that they both detest their children. Thea didn't like Celine, that much is clear, but quite a bit of evidence seems to imply the same in Celine and Helios. One of the house sequences actually has us playing as Helios. This is confirmed as much when you read the name on the door. In that same level, there's a voicemail on the answering machine from Celine, where she tells him that she's going to be home late. Celine worked long nights to pursue her dream, but ended up neglecting Helios because of this. There was also possible evidence that she physically abused him. At one point, his favorite plushie Octo goes missing, only for it to be found underneath the kitchen table. When he goes downstairs, he says that Octo knows not to go down here, referring to the fact that Celine might get angry at him, so he tries to stay upstairs in his room. It's very common for kids of abused parents to see places in their homes as off limits. Rooms you don't want to enter unless you want to piss off mom and dad. That's what this feels like to me. Similarly, Helios ends up running into the living room at one point as he's trying to hide from what he calls the monster, which eventually revealed to be the astronaut. He is specifically hiding inside the TV until the astronaut reaches in and grabs him. But this same scene happens earlier, but from another perspective, as at one point Celine goes up to the TV and reaches her hands in as well. She also has a dialogue line that says, "What are you doing? Wake up." These two scenes are likely the same thing from different points of view. Analyzing the dialogue likely means that this is how Celine woke Helios up one day, possibly because he wouldn't get out of bed, or simply because she was already angry and decided to take it out on him. Celine doing the same actions as the astronaut lines up with the other ending, where Celine is seen inside the suit of the astronaut. But I wouldn't take this literally. Just as this creature might be how Celine sees Thea, the astronaut is how Helios might see Celine. I see it as a representation of Celine's drive to become an astronaut. Back to that other house sequence, alongside news of the crash is another report about the lunar landing. This shows the two most significant parts of Celine's life, her relationship with her mother and her dream of becoming an astronaut. Relating this back to the prior scene, her dream of exploring the world is overtaking her responsibilities as a mother, correlating with the voicemail of her coming home late. Celine wanted to pursue her dreams, but like Thea, their child forced them to stay grounded on Earth. As much as she hates her though, there is also a log of Celine's that mentions how Thea was right when it came to raising a child. Celine figured that she could be a better mother and possibly stop the trauma that Thea imposed on her, but she ended up becoming just like her mother, doing the same things as she does and reacting the same to similar situations. Like the Abyss though, we've only just breached the surface, as I think we can go even deeper with this. This next bit isn't confirmed, but does at least warrant some discussion. Crazy theory, but I believe that Celine may have killed Thea and Helios so that she could become an astronaut. At the hospital is a police report that shows that a police officer got a call about a disturbance at the Vassos residence, which is Celine's last name. When he arrived, she was too distraught to talk, but the officer noticed that the house was on fire. When you put down the report though, Celine says the line, "The price of freedom." This is one of those wide-eyed, jaw-dropping moments to me, as this was one of the most obvious confessions I've ever heard. We know that Atropos has parallels to things from Celine's past, so it's to my understanding that Celine burning the house on Atropos was connected to Celine burning her own house with Thea inside. This could also explain why we have to go to the basement to find the wheelchair, as it could be showing us where she was in her last moments. As for Helios, well, we already know about the crash, but I also believe this to be intentional. I think it's fair to say that the astronaut is not real, at least on Earth. We know it's a real entity on Atropos since the glyphs mention it by name, but it's also Atropos. A lot of weird shit goes on here. To me, I see the astronaut in this moment as Celine refusing to acknowledge her decision, as if blaming it on something else, while also reinforcing that her ambitions as an astronaut far outweighed everything else in her life, as it's the astronaut that caused the crash, or more specifically, it's her dreams of becoming an astronaut that caused the crash. Still, this doesn't explain why she threw the car off the bridge, and I admit, it's a pretty big hole in my theory. It's also quite difficult to get a timeline of these events too. What convinces me that most, if not all of this was intentional are two scout logs. One where she says, "That's why I signed up, there are no attachments pulling me back," and another where she mentions how she has given up everything for this role. The wording here is quite interesting. It's almost like she sees her family as a burden to her. People are stopping her from achieving her dreams, which is why she had to get rid of them. Another log also laments how Thea was never happy, but that she always saved her smiles for Helios. Once again though, after it's found, Celine will then say that now they can be together again, further confirming that yes, both are dead, but her tone here is bizarre. There is no guilt or sadness or anything, just once again stating the facts as she always does. And it's a pretty cold thing to say for someone who just lost a mom and son. Everything about Celine being a murderer though is just my interpretation, and I don't want it to come off as canon, just a tinfoil hat theory. The tinfoil is starting to meld into my skull though, as there is still the biggest question that lies at the heart of all this. Is Atropos real or not? Celine acknowledges that Atropos and the astronaut are real, but in the same breath says she can't trust her own mind. There are also numerous references to Celine not being fit for the job. At her house is a rejection letter from Astra that is next to her computer, and numerous scout logs talk about her mental state, one of which is about her delusions. It seems like Celine never became an Astra scout, which leads some to believe that this is all in her head, and that exploring space was something she wanted to do but never could. It also might explain the car crash, as she was possibly lost in thought or angry over the rejection, causing her to take her own life. However, Scout Log 62 shows that after Celine gets out of the car, she makes it home and greets her mom, so it wouldn't connect to the theory that she died along with Helios and is living out her life in her head. Assuming that this is true though, that would then make Returnal a proprietor of the "it was all a dream" trope. While I don't personally subscribe to the theory myself, even if it is canon, it's not as simplistic as boring as the trope often is. Usually this ends up giving the scene no meaning, but I found it to be the opposite. Celine and the parallels to her mom are integral to the story. The game has a clear inspiration from Greek mythology by using its characters and events to create another parallel to the story. Celine is in a manifestation of her own hell, either because the planet is manipulating her, or because she's guilty of multiple heinous acts and is now being tortured for them in her metaphorical purgatory. Even if the main plot of Atropos didn't happen, the relationship with her mom and son did happen, and were at the very least the cause of these possible delusions. Like I said though, I don't personally believe in the theory myself, as I find the story much more entertaining and rewarding if Celine had actually landed on a planet that is forcing her to question herself and come to terms with what she did. Regardless, Celine is still not done talking with her mom didn't reward her with anything, so now she must seek the answers once more. Her only lead though is the tower, this never-ending spiral that continues to push her further and further into madness. She believes that if she climbs high enough, she'll be worthy in the eyes of Algos. Algos is the boss that you fight at the end of every phase, who is unique in the fact that he only starts with one phase of health. The trade-off is that he grows in power upon each visit, having up to a maximum of 3 phases by your third fight. 3 is the magic number after all. 3 levels in Act 1, another 3 in Act 2, and 3 more to cap off the third act. This means that Celine has gone through a total of 9 different levels across the game, almost as if she's going through the 9 circles of her own hell. As you can tell, he's a specific boss to the tower, and the only one you'll fight in said tower. Well, at least as far as Phase 3. I didn't make it very far into Phase 4. Like the rest of the cast, the name is based on a Greek deity, who is seen as the personification of pain. Fitting, given how painful this thing is to climb. This could also be a happy accident, but Algos is often a shortened version of the word algorithm, and Algo is also the name of a programming language, which could link how the tower in the previous acts can be seen as an algorithmic sequence of different levels and maps. All that's required of the player is for them to reach Phase 4 Room 1, as doing so will mean you have completed the first 3 phases and fought Algos 3 separate times. Once defeated, Celine will question if she is finally worthy and thinks that she should visit the hospital again.
Request approved. Reinforcements on the way.
What do you want me to see?
Ready to liberate!
Tagging map, northwest. Sending in an eagle.
Just an empty space.
Tagging location, northwest. Heavy, northwest, close. Sending in an eagle.
chaos has taken her to a pocket dimension of sorts filled with nothing but emptiness. Inside are numerous other Selines who all made it to where she is now. Despite feeling displeased about not being shown anything as her reward, she notices that it's rather calm, and is likely the first time she's given herself a break since landing on Atropos. So like the Selines around her, she kneels down and rests, and judging by the others, she likely stayed here until her time was up. Even though the player can continue playing after viewing the cutscene, Celine doesn't comment on the vision, so this cutscene seems to be the final moment of the story. She doesn't go back to Atropos, her duty is complete, and the cycle is broken. It's not exactly a happy ending, but it's something. Celine finally understands what she did and came to terms with her own life. Her actions, decisions, thoughts, and excuses all came back. She finally understands and accepts who she is. While being able to go home and live her life would be great, this is as good of an ending as you could ask for. Plus, assuming that Celine is actually guilty of murder, this is ultimately a fate she imposed upon herself, so it's fitting that she doesn't get everything she wants, after taking it away from those that she knew. But this finally leads us to the actual ending of Return. If the commentary throughout this video didn't give it away, I love this game. The gameplay is utterly addicting, and I cannot wait to hop in and grind the tower again. The amount of items, weapons, and buffs you can find adds to the diversity of each run, forcing you to not just go back to the old reliable. Sometimes the cards are in your favor, and you have to roll with the punches, whether it means being permanently debuffed or having to kill the final boss with a starter pistol. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow. It's a perfectly concise gameplay loop that I never got tired of. The story, on the other hand, is anything but concise, but there is beauty within all that chaos. Piecing together lore from all kinds of different sources is exhausting but very rewarding, as I feel like I'm uncovering my own secrets, just as Celine was uncovering the story of Atropos. This video is my attempt at making sense of this chaotic amalgamation so that I can share it with those who may be confused. As you can see, Returnal is a community-driven game, and only by interacting and sharing can we truly uncover its narrative. So if you played the game yourself or came to some conclusions while watching the video, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I've done my best to share what I think happened, but there are still many things I've left unchecked, all of which have still stumped me to this day. Such as the true nature of the aliens. Were they real, or were they just manifestations made by Celine? If the car, house, and some of the wildlife can be related to her past experiences, who's to say that the aliens aren't also a fragment of her mind too, and that the hive mind and subsequent detachment isn't just a metaphor for something that happened to Celine? I personally want to believe that they are real, but I'm also pro-Atropos being real. Anyone who isn't could easily make the argument that the aliens too aren't real either. Then there's also the nature of chaos and what it truly wants, and most bizarre of all is the existence of someone named Alex. I'm not sure how relevant to the story this actually is, but nearby those childlike drawings is another one, this time of a family with the names Mom, Dad, and someone named Alex written on it. There is not only no other reference to Alex anywhere in the game, but there isn't even an Alex in Greek mythology. Hilariously, the only other thing named Alex is a book directly below it called Alex and the Giant Nectarine, which is surely a reference to James and the Giant Peach. Still, much of Returnal's story is mentioned and explained, even if we're missing a lot of the pieces. It's not as coherent as a normal story might be, but I think it goes without saying that Returnal is anything but normal. It's got a gripping and fantastic story from start to finish, one that really makes me wish I played this earlier. As of now, though, there is no news regarding a Returnal 2 or even the company's next game, but honestly, I don't think there needs to be one. Returnal is a game that can stand out on its own and doesn't need a sequel to keep going. Still, it's going to suck not seeing another game like Returnal. It's a one-of-a-kind in many ways, which makes it harder to replicate. All I know for sure, though, is that once this video is done, I'd want nothing more than to return to Returnal. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed. Gotta admit, it feels nice to make a video that isn't an hour long sometimes. As for what's next on the docket, honestly, I have no idea. I have a few games I'd like to cover soon, but I'm not sure which one I'll do first. Not that you need to worry though, since I'll always be updating you in the community tab like I always do. So if you want to keep up to date on the progress of future videos, make sure to turn notifications on. As always, like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new. Thank you to my returning viewers coming back to another video, and take care everyone. Goodbye.
I bloody love eagles in Helldivers 2. Moves fly in different directions. All the way automaton buildings detonate a moment after the initial blast into a beautiful fireball debris. Never Saurus is meant to well known seriously how construction for every situation there's an eagle that supports it, and they form the backbone of any party's opposition. Like everything in this game, there are subtle nuances in the way they work and how to get the most out of them. With that in mind, here are some tips and tricks which will help you perhaps choose which eagles are right for you, and if you're struggling for time, hopefully make an informed decision on where to spend your hard-earned game currency first. Let's jump right into the eagle cluster They literally hit the ground and eat the cluster bomb a moment later, being completely nullified. This strike comes with 4 uses, and coupled with the hangar ship module upgrade, you can really cause havoc with this stratagem. More on those modules later. This would be a good time, as I talk about this particular stratagem, give out some more general tips for Eagle usage, which you can apply across the board. As with previous videos, folks, these are just my thoughts and opinions. I've been delighted with the comments you've been leaving. I've learned a lot in reading through them, and for example, I found out after yesterday's video that I don't use the machine gun as effectively as I could. So shout out to those of you that pointed that out last video. Keep it coming, it's helping us all learn, including me. The most obvious one is that if you can drop an eagle on a group of non-aggroed enemies, of course, absolutely do it. It will mean you get the most bang for your buck here. But there is a caveat. Please communicate with your group what you're about to do. You're essentially about to open an engagement. Could someone else sync up with you? If someone's throwing in an orbital strike, perhaps advise them to put it slightly in front of your strike, because yours is going to come in much faster, and that will trigger the enemy to start advancing. Don't be greedy, work as a team. Leading on from this, generally, if you have an attack approaching, try to place it slightly in front of your target and take into consideration the way the attack spreads. Whilst this seems obvious, you do see a lot of wasted potential with this strike due to this lack of consideration. When you first start using each eagle, make an effort to watch how it lands, study the pattern it makes, and the time it takes to come in. There are subtle differences here. You will get to grips with these much quicker if you take this approach. Another nice tip here is keep your eye on the kill count for your strikes. Look in the bottom center of the screen, and you can use this as a marker to tell how many kills you're getting and if your strikes are being effective. Sometimes it will also pay off to delay your calling. Maybe your party can call in mortars or an orbital laser, and it's doing work, but it's disturbed a nest or a group of automatons. Observe the situation and react accordingly. Anticipate advances and hit them hard. I cannot stress enough how important it is to get the hangar upgrades if you're wanting to get rolling with Eagles, especially the liquid ventilated cockpit. This halves the Eagle cooldown by 50%, but you can throw these in much more often, and this, folks, is a main strength of the Eagle. The frequency in which you can call them in, coupled with instantaneous results, cannot be underestimated. The second and third hangar upgrades reduce Eagle rearm time and give you an extra charge. Do not sleep on this ability like I sometimes do. If you've had a large engagement, use the rearm to reset your charges on all your Eagles. This is particularly beneficial with cluster and strafe. If you get a total of 7 uses out of these, your squad will be thankful. Something which I would be incredibly thankful for would be if you could drop a channel and subscribe. The amount of
If you would like to support the channel, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. More information in the description.
I bloody love Eagle.
Welcome back. Democracy's reach extends a bit further, thanks to you.
Allied destroyer has left squadron.
Mission complete. Sample collection. Below average.
I think I got some back. Yeah.
Welcome aboard, Helldiver. And congratulations on completing your training.
Ready for another mission, Helldiver?
Allied destroyer coordinates received. Initiating. Allied destroyer has joined squadron.
What about here?
impressions, live service trappings, and looter shooter gameplay, there was some anticipation for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. It's Rocksteady's first game since 2015's Batman Arkham Knight, and now it's lowest rated, which is hardly ideal. Nevertheless, after a rumored 7 years of development, it's interesting to see it upstaged by another live service shooter, Arrowhead Game Studios' Helldivers 2 for PS5 and PC.
Firing orbital barrage. Clear the area.
Helldivers 1 is a top-down shooter, but the developer handled the transition to third-person very well. As such, despite various issues and controversy surrounding its anti-cheat in Protect Game Guard, Helldivers 2 is touted as an example of live service done right, and a great shooter on top of this. It's also been in development for about 8 years. Seeing Arrowhead maintain its vision over such a long period and deliver a solid title is worth noting. Helldivers is nearing 200,000 peak concurrent players on Steam, not to mention 360,000 concurrent players on both platforms. Meanwhile, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League peaked at 13,459 concurrent on Steam. So what sets the two apart? How is Helldivers 2 doing so well, despite so many other live service titles, Suicide Squad included, failing to gain ground? The gameplay is perhaps worth discussing the most. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is a looter shooter with a heavy emphasis on movement, which also informs the level design and boss fights. You'll spend most of the time bouncing across rooftops, staying off of the streets, and taking high ground. Bosses are horrible for other reasons, as others have thoroughly documented. However, if you get used to the movement, it's possible to zip around effortlessly in Metropolis, chaining together wall runs, leaps, dashes, and grapples. However, as nice as the city looks, the cityscape has little impact on the gameplay, whether it's sunny or raining. By comparison, Helldivers 2 is more boots on the ground and tactical. You can sprint, crouch, crawl, and dive. And while there is a decent amount of deformation through the environments, formation does play some part. It's limited to scaling up surfaces, though you won't be climbing mountains, using a jetpack for some added verticality on a heavy cooldown, or dropping into a higher point. Perhaps the most important thing to note is that the high ground won't necessarily save you, since many Terminids can fall or jump up to your position and knock you off. Similarly, the automatons have enough firepower to dislodge you. In many cases, it's ideal to seek cover or stay on the move. Furthermore, the environments actually play a part in combat. Outside of discovering Helldiver equipment on the field, there are unexploded hell bombs to shoot to wipe out scores of enemies, or yourself. Jungles affect sightlines, while some foliage and barbed wire can slow movement. Visiting a hot planet will affect your weapons, and vice versa on a cold planet. You'll even see your character sliding a bit on the ice. There's also effects like fog, which can heavily obscure your vision and even affect the minimap, making drops much more perilous. Both titles are fundamentally unique in how they handle movement. Their environments facilitate those differently, though Helldivers 2 is superior, considering the latter affect your gameplay. However, the combat in both is where the really stark differences come into play. Since Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is a looter shooter, it has to homogenize the gunplay across the board. Harley Quinn yields a minigun as efficiently as King Shark, and Captain Boomerang is as good with a sniper rifle as Deadshot. The talents set them apart, though the amount of damage increases, perks on reloading, damage reduction, ability cooldowns, traversal resources, and whatnot. Many of the weapons also feel similar. Sure, a black mask pistol fires differently from a sharp shot, but several auto rifles, SMGs, sniper rifles, and even shotguns feel fundamentally the same to fire. Character abilities amount to different kinds of effects when triggering a squad ultimate, which slows everything around you regardless of the character chosen. Traversal attacks, which is essentially an enemy clearing skill. To be fair, King Shark's does feel distinct. And suicide strikes for massive single target damage. Their melee attacks are somewhat unique, but again, there are two options. Melee from slightly farther off with Deadshot and Captain Boomerang, or up close with Harley and King Shark. Grenades offer some interesting afflictions and effects like slow-mo. Otherwise, it's down to the loot and talents to change how a character plays. Elements like shield harvesting, counter shots, affliction strikes, and juggle kills mix up the general gameplay, but it's still a lot of mindless shooting. Helldivers 2 doesn't have loot, though you will have variants on weapons, like the Liberator that provide more armor piercing and explosive rounds, or the Breaker with its incendiary rounds or faster fire rate. Because the title aims for a more realistic feel, the steady shots of the Liberator explosive will feel different from the weapon sway and recoil of the regular version. Similarly, a machine gun is stronger and more unwieldy, requiring you to stop and reload it, while the Stalwart is faster and can be reloaded while moving but deals less damage. It sounds simple, but you need to adjust your playstyle around these weapons, whether it's fleeing while firing behind you with SMGs or crouching down for maximum machine gun efficiency. Of course, there are other nuances, like faster reloads when a single bullet remains in the chamber, or losing ammo when you reload a full magazine. Even if some weapons are better than others, your core loadout is focused heavily on stratagems. They could technically classify as abilities while also impacting what weapons to use on the battlefield. There are specialized loadouts, like Eagle Strikes, some of which are fantastic at dealing massive amounts of explosive damage, but need the time to rearm after a selected number of uses. Turrets, which fire autonomously and range from mortar launches to chain guns, and calling down support weapons like the recoilless rifle, railgun, anti-material rifle, and more. Helldivers 2 also encourages actual cooperation with some of its weapons. The autocannon and recoilless rifle fire much faster when a teammate assists with the reloads. You also need to pay attention to objectives. If chargers are the targets, bring in a railgun or rockets to destroy the armor on their legs, and finish them off with regular weapons. If the automatons are being the automatons and resisting democracy, bring a shield or a barrier strike.
Allied destroyer has left squadron. Allied destroyer coordinates received.
Ready for another mission, Helldiver?
Hellpods primed. Engaging orbital thrusters. Orbit synchronized.
won't be any bots left. Just manage democracy. Helldiver, glad.
Innocents perish with every wasted second. We must act.
Initiating FTL jump to the Ubanea system. FTL jump successful. Hellpods primed. Mission coordinates locked.
Let them come. Let them brawl. Let them face the insurmountable might of the Helldivers.
Calling down a sentry! Requesting sentry! Requesting tac pack!
Sending down equipment back.
Calling down a support weapon! Heavy, south, close. Dropping a pin, east. Reloading! That's called democracy! Throwing supply beacon! Sample collected!
touchdown.
Sentry.
Tagging location. Objective located.
Calling down a sentry.
Calling down a sentry. Pelican 1 preparing to depart. Shuttle launch in 20 seconds. Extraction complete.